A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Have you ever looked at a mountain and thought, I wonder how much hardware I could fit inside that thing if I really tried? Because apparently, for the military, the answer is always more than you think. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the Cheyenne Mountain Complex and the wider world of deep underground facilities. And honestly, Herman, I feel like you have been waiting for an excuse to talk about giant holes in the ground for about 3 years now.
You are not wrong, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say the timing on this is incredible. We are standing here on March 23rd, 2026, and we are seeing a massive strategic resurgence in what the industry calls DUs, or Deep Underground Facilities. It is not just nostalgia for the Cold War. The physics of warfare have changed so much in the last 24 months that digging deep is suddenly the only logical move left on the board. We have moved from the era of static defense into a high-threat environment dominated by hypersonics.
It is funny because I remember people saying these places were obsolete. Back in 2006, there was this thing called the Peterson Shift. NORAD moved its primary operations out of Cheyenne Mountain and over to Peterson Space Force Base. The narrative back then was that the mountain was a relic, right? A very expensive, very cool-looking relic that we did not really need anymore because we had better satellites and distributed networks. We thought the end of history meant we didn't need to hide under 2,000 feet of granite anymore.
That narrative mostly held up for 20 years. Cheyenne Mountain was moved to what they call warm standby. It was still staffed, still functional, but it was the alternate command center. But look at what has happened just this month. The Canadian Department of National Defense just released their plan for 2026 and 2027 on March 13th, and they are accelerating that $38.6 billion NORAD modernization program. A huge part of that is about resilience. When you are facing Mach 20 kinetic penetrators, a regular office building at a Space Force base starts looking like a very fragile target. The warm standby status is being reevaluated because the primary hubs are now too vulnerable.
Mach 20. Let's pause there for a second. Because Daniel mentioned the Indian test of the Agni 5 bunker buster variant that happened on March 26th. Wait, that was just a few weeks ago, early March 2026. If something is moving at Mach 20, does 2,000 feet of granite even matter? Or are we just building very elaborate, very expensive tombs?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question being debated at places like the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The Agni 5 test was a massive wake-up call because it is designed specifically to penetrate hardened subterranean nodes at speeds between Mach 8 and Mach 20. But here is the thing about Cheyenne Mountain that people forget. It is not just a basement in a hill, it is an engineering marvel. We are talking about 15 independent buildings all sitting inside a grid of 3 miles of tunnels, and the buildings themselves are not bolted to the floor. They are mounted on 1,319 massive steel springs. Each spring is about 3 feet tall and weighs a ton.
I love that detail. It is basically a giant shock absorber for a nuclear blast. You're telling me the entire command center can just bounce?
It can move 12 inches in any direction. If a weapon hits the mountain, the granite might crack, and the shockwave might travel through the rock, but the buildings inside will just sway. It decouples the structure from the seismic energy of the impact, and when you combine that with two 25-ton blast doors that can seal in 45 seconds, you have a level of physical hardening that almost nothing else on Earth can match. These doors are curved steel and concrete plugs. The more pressure you put on them from the outside, the tighter they seal into the frame. It is the same principle as a cork in a bottle, but on a massive scale.
But how does that hold up against the modern digital threat? Because you can have all the granite in the world, but if your fiber optics are fried by an electromagnetic pulse, you are just sitting in a very dark, very quiet cave.
That is where the recent retrofitting comes in. These facilities have been undergoing massive digital hardening. It is a paradox, really. To make them relevant for 2026, they had to strip out a lot of the old tech and shield every single wire against EMPs. The mountain acts as a natural Faraday cage to some extent, but they have taken it much further. This is why the Pentagon proposed that wage increase on March 4th for the personnel at Raven Rock, or Site R. They are trying to align the pay with Washington, D.C. Scales to attract the kind of high-level tech talent that usually goes to Silicon Valley. Running a subterranean Pentagon requires a very specific set of skills in cyber defense and spectrum management.
Site R is the Pennsylvania one, right? The underground Pentagon. I saw that news about the drone incursion there a few weeks ago. Some guy flew a civilian drone over the communication arrays and got himself a very fast introduction to federal law enforcement. It goes to show that even if the facility is 650 feet underground, the surface infrastructure is still the weak point. You can hide the people, but you cannot hide the massive satellite dishes you need to actually talk to the outside world.
That drone incident led to much stricter national defense airspace enforcement. They are treating the air above these mountains as if it were the facility itself. These dugs are nodes in a network. If you cut the nodes off, the mountain is just a very secure island. The current commander of NORAD, General Gregory Guillot, has been very vocal about this. It is not enough to survive the first strike. You have to be able to command and control the response. That is why the Arctic over-the-horizon radar deployment is so critical. We are building these eyes in the north to give the mountain more time to react. In the age of hypersonics, reaction time is the only currency that matters.
It feels like we are seeing a global arms race in digging. You mentioned the Russian facilities in the Ural Mountains. Yamantau is the one that always sounds like a Bond villain's lair. What is the scale over there? Because I have heard numbers that sound fake.
Yamantau is staggering. Intelligence reports from the Institute for the Study of War on March 7th highlighted that Russia is leaning even harder into these Ural facilities to protect their command units from long-range strikes like ATAC-MS. Yamantau is estimated to cover about 400 square miles. For context, that is roughly the size of Washington, D.C. inside the Beltway, but all carved into the rock. They say it can house 60,000 people. Nearby is the closed city of Mesgoria, which serves as the support hub for the complex.
60,000! That is not a bunker, that is a city. Why the difference in scale? The U.S. seems to focus on these lean, high-tech nodes like Cheyenne or Mount Weather, while Russia goes for these subterranean metropolises.
It reflects a different philosophy of continuity of government, or COG. The U.S. system is built around the idea of keeping the executive branch and military command functional so they can manage a crisis. Facilities like Mount Weather in Virginia, which FEMA operates, are designed to house the civilian leadership and keep the national radio system alive. It is the primary relocation site for the executive branch. Russia's approach, particularly with Yamantau, seems much more focused on preserving a large segment of the military-industrial elite and their families. It is survival on a mass scale rather than just operational continuity.
Which brings up the bunker boom Daniel mentioned. This shift toward the private sector. If you are a billionaire in 2026, you are probably looking at these military facilities and thinking, I want one of those, but with a better wine cellar. The Airy project is the big one people are talking about lately, right? $300 million for a private luxury bunker.
The Airy is the pinnacle of what they are calling survival inequality. It is built with the same hardening standards as a military dug, but with artificial skylights that simulate a 24-hour sun cycle and hydroponic gardens that look like a 5-star resort. What fascinates me is the market growth. Research firms like Spherical Insights are projecting the subterranean infrastructure market to hit over $81.7 billion by 2035. That is a 10.44% annual growth rate. People are betting on the ground being the only safe place left because satellite-based surveillance has made the surface a glass house.
I find the survival inequality argument interesting because it assumes that being in the hole is actually better. I mean, sure, you survive the initial Mach 20 kinetic impact, but then what? You are 600 feet down, the surface is a mess, and you are living in a very expensive basement with 40 other rich people you probably didn't like that much to begin with. There is a certain grim irony to it.
It is the paradox of the bunker. The more secure you make it, the more of a prison it becomes. But from a strategic standpoint for the state, it is not about comfort. It is about the fact that if the command structure disappears, the entire nation state dissolves. That is why these facilities are seeing this massive influx of cash. We are moving away from the idea of one big doomsday bunker and toward a distributed network of hardened nodes. Cheyenne Mountain is the gold standard because it has the history and the granite, but it is now part of a much larger, much more complex web.
You mentioned that Cheyenne is a warm standby facility. Does that mean if something happens today, they are ready to go in minutes? Or is there a whole process of turning the lights on and dusting off the consoles?
It is fully operational. They have crews there 24/7. The Air Force Space Command oversees the day-to-day maintenance. The term warm standby just means it is not the primary day-to-day hub for every single mission. But the handover can happen almost instantaneously. In fact, during high-threat environments or major exercises, the command often shifts there just to prove it can. With the new Arctic radar systems coming online this year, the data feeds are already being piped into the mountain's battle management systems. It is very much a live player in the national defense architecture.
I want to go back to the engineering for a second because I am still stuck on those springs. How do you maintain a building on springs for 70 years? Do they have to go in there with a giant grease gun and lubricate the bottom of the mountain every decade?
It is a massive maintenance task. They have a dedicated team for the industrial systems. They have to check those 1,319 springs for fatigue, manage the massive diesel generators that can power a small city, and ensure the air filtration systems can scrub out chemical, biological, or radiological contaminants. It is one of the most complex facilities management jobs on the planet. You are essentially maintaining a spaceship that is buried under 2,000 feet of rock.
A spaceship that doesn't go anywhere, which, as a sloth, I can actually respect. It is the ultimate staying-at-home strategy. But seriously, the Agni 5 test really changes the math, doesn't it? If India has a bunker buster that can hit Mach 20, then China and Russia probably have something similar or are working on it. Does the spring system protect against a direct kinetic hit that isn't nuclear?
That is the core of the hypersonic vulnerability debate. A nuclear blast creates a massive overpressure wave and seismic shock, which the springs are great at handling. A hypersonic kinetic penetrator is different. It is like a needle hitting the mountain at incredible speed. It doesn't need an explosion. The sheer kinetic energy can liquefy rock. The hope is that 2,000 feet of granite is still enough to bleed off that energy before it reaches the interior chambers. But we are reaching the physical limits of what rock can do.
So, what is the next step? Do we dig deeper, or do we start looking at different materials? I mean, if granite isn't enough, what is?
The trend seems to be moving toward active hardening. Instead of just sitting there and taking the hit, you use point defense systems on the surface to intercept the penetrators before they even touch the mountain. That is why you see increased security and more sophisticated sensor arrays around these sites. You have to defend the mountain to keep the mountain safe. It is a layered defense. You have the satellites for early warning, the surface-to-air systems for interception, and then the granite and springs as the final, last-ditch layer of protection.
It is a lot of effort to protect a few rooms full of computers and generals. But I guess when those computers control the nuclear triad, it is probably worth the $38 billion. I am curious about the human element, too. You mentioned the wage increases at Raven Rock. What is it like to actually work in these places for 20 years? You are basically a submariner, but without the ocean.
It takes a certain kind of person. There is no natural light, the air is processed, and you are constantly aware of the millions of tons of rock over your head. But there is also a very high sense of mission. Most of the people at Cheyenne or Site R know that if they are ever doing their job for real, it is the worst day in human history. That creates a very intense, very professional culture. And with the modern digital retrofitting, it is actually a very high-tech environment. It is not the green screen phosphor monitors of the 1980s anymore. It is state-of-the-art battle management with AI integration to help process the flood of data from those new Arctic radars. When you only have minutes to react to a Mach 20 threat, you cannot wait for a committee meeting.
No, you definitely don't want a committee meeting when a kinetic needle is screaming toward your mountain. Well, Herman, I think we have sufficiently explored the hole in the ground for one day. It is a weirdly comforting thought. in a dark way, that these places exist, like a giant insurance policy that we all hope we never have to collect on.
It is the ultimate break glass in case of emergency infrastructure. And as long as the world stays as volatile as it is in 2026, we are going to see more of it, not less. We are going to see deeper holes, bigger springs, and more drones getting arrested over the mountains of Pennsylvania. We are moving from yield protection to precision protection.
I will stick to the surface for now. The air is better up here, even if it is less hardened. But if I ever see you starting to take a very deep hole in your backyard, Herman, I will know it is time to worry.
I will let you know when I start ordering the 3-foot steel springs. That is the tell.
Fair enough. Well, that is our deep dive into the world of subterranean strategic nodes. If you found this as fascinating as Herman clearly did, you can find more of our explorations into the weird and technical at myweirdprompts.com. We have a massive archive there, including some of those episodes we mentioned today.
Definitely check out episode 1465, Deep Bunkers or Deep Tombs, where we look at Iran's missile cities. It provides a perfect contrast to the US and Russian facilities. And episode 993, The Orbital Shell Game, explains how satellite surveillance is forcing everyone to go underground.
Big thanks to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the show running from the surface. And a huge thank you to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power our research and the pipeline that gets this show to your ears. We literally couldn't do this without that high-performance compute.
If you are enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us out. It tells the algorithms that people actually like hearing about giant springs and Russian mountain cities, which helps us reach more curious minds.
We will be back soon with another prompt from Daniel. Until then, stay curious, and maybe don't fly your drone over any suspicious-looking mountains in Pennsylvania. This has been My Weird Prompts.
See you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to